Only in winter will someone stare at a blizzard, cancel physics entirely, and demand the airline turn the sky back on. And somehow, that's not even the most baffling complaint we heard. Things get stranger from here. 1. A passenger once marched up to an agent during a full whiteout blizzard and demanded they cancel the snow because they had paid good money for a sky that behaves itself. This person looked outside at a landscape that resembled a shaken snow globe and insisted the airline should turn the weather off the way one might mute a malfunctioning smart TV. When the agent explained, gently, that meteorology was not included in the ticket price, the passenger accused the airline of colluding with winter to ruin their vacation. They even threatened to file a complaint with whoever runs the seasons, as if Mother Nature were an overworked clerk who simply needed a firmer tone. It was the kind of moment that makes you wonder how this customer navigates daily life in a world filled with trees, clouds, and consequences. 2. During a runway shutdown caused by sheets of ice thick enough to host the Winter Olympics, one traveler demanded the pilot drive around the ice patches, believing a 90-ton aircraft could slalom like a Subaru in a holiday commercial. This traveler treated aircraft physics like an optional side quest, insisting the pilot just use the dry parts. They even pointed at the window, gesturing vaguely toward a horizon of frozen tundra, arguing that some areas look fine from here, as if they were personally qualified to give ground condition assessments from 10,000 feet away. They couldn't comprehend why the airline wouldn't risk a $200 million aircraft just to honor their plans for a ski weekend, which was especially ironic, considering their luggage was already too heavy to meet carry-on requirements. 3. One traveler insisted the airline was responsible for the cold temperature outside, arguing that stepping off the plane into freezing air was false advertising for a warm destination. They believed the airline should have preheated the outdoors before landing, the way you might warm up a car on a frosty morning. When staff clarified that outdoor weather is not a controllable feature, the traveler pushed back, claiming that if the airline could fly through clouds, it could also install heaters on the sky to ensure comfortable arrivals. They declared they were misled by the brochures, which never mentioned that the destination's winter was shockingly cold. As far as logic goes, it was a refreshing new frontier, somewhere between conspiracy theorist and someone who just discovered the existence of seasons. 4. A passenger confronted a gate agent because their flight was delayed by de-icing procedures, insisting the plane should have just stayed warm to avoid freezing in the first place. They treated multi-ton machinery like leftover soup. Just keep it hot and you'll be fine. They suggested parking planes in a heated garage, preferably one big enough for all the aircraft, obviously, said with the confidence of someone who has never seen an aircraft outside a cartoon. When the agent explained that ice can compromise the wings, the passenger waved this off as overly dramatic and accused the airline of inventing fake safety excuses to ruin people's days. According to them, ice buildup was just cosmetic and should have been ignored like a mildly disappointing haircut. 5. One traveler tried to file an official complaint because the snowplows on the airfield weren't clearing the snow artistically enough. They insisted the plows were leaving unpleasant piles that ruined their social media aesthetics and made the airport look sloppy. According to this self-appointed snow critic, winter should be curated, not endured. They demanded the airport bring in professional outdoor stylists, or at least plow in straight lines like normal humans. When told safety mattered more than symmetry, they sighed dramatically and declared the airline didn't care about beauty standards, which was a new angle in aviation politics. Apparently, nothing says emergency landing like asymmetrical snow piles. 6. A passenger insisted their connecting flight should not be canceled due to icy runways because they had purchased a flexible fare, interpreting the word flexible as immune to weather. They believed this ticket type granted them supernatural travel privileges, including the ability to bypass storms using sheer financial entitlement. When staff explained that safety regulations applied to everyone equally, they scoffed and said, "Then what am I paying extra for?" As though a slightly nicer boarding group should grant dominion over atmospheric conditions. They later demanded compensation for emotional frostbite, claiming the cold air inside the terminal was personally targeted at them. 7. One traveler became furious that the airline refused to stop the wind, passionately arguing that wind is just moving air, and therefore easier to control than rain. When staff informed them that wind is a natural force, not an appliance with an off switch, they dismissed this explanation as corporate laziness. They claimed airlines deliberately allow wind because it makes delays look legitimate, as though gusts of 40 mph were part of a secret business strategy. They even threatened to bring their own wind-blocking equipment next time, which raised concerns about what exactly they planned to pack. 8. A couple once demanded that the airline compensate them for ruining their relationship after a snowstorm delayed their flight long enough for them to start arguing in the terminal. They insisted the airline had created the environment in which their bickering escalated, as if the storm were a relationship counselor with malicious intent. Their fight allegedly began over whether to share a pretzel and escalated into a full emotional meltdown blamed solely on meteorology. They argued that if the flight had left on time, they would still be a harmonious couple, which many witnesses doubted based on the decibel level alone. It was the first time anyone had attempted to classify winter weather as a third party in relationship litigation. 9. One traveler attempted to shame airport staff because the snow outside looked lower quality than advertised. They claimed the photos online depicted fluffy, Hallmark-style snow, while the real thing was slushy and disrespectful. They were personally offended that nature had not delivered a cinematic aesthetic and demanded a refund for what they called false snow representation. When the agent explained the airport does not handcraft precipitation, the traveler grew exasperated and said, "Then you should at least warn people when the snow is ugly." Apparently, weather now requires disclaimers. 10. A traveler once stormed up to the service desk because their winter flight was delayed by freezing fog, which they described as a conspiracy between the airport and Big Mist. They believed fog was being released on purpose to slow down travel, possibly by airlines trying to sell more overpriced snacks. When staff attempted to explain condensation, they interrupted and said, "Don't science me." They claimed fog was clearly optional, citing a movie they'd seen where planes flew fine in fog because the pilots were competent. Hollywood, apparently, is their primary source of meteorological education. 11. Somebody demanded that the airline reimburse them for their winter jacket, claiming they shouldn't need to dress for weather the airline created. This person genuinely believed that because they boarded in warm weather and landed in the middle of a snowstorm, the airline was responsible for the climate gap. According to them, this temperature difference was a trap, forcing passengers into clothing expenses they never agreed to. They even suggested airlines should provide complimentary seasonal wardrobes at the gate, like some kind of airborne fashion rental service. Their seriousness was the most chilling part of the entire encounter. 12. A passenger became enraged that the runway snowplows made too much winter noise, claiming the sound disrupted their meditation app. They insisted the airport synchronize plowing schedules with passenger mindfulness needs, which is remarkable considering plows are only active during blizzards. They argued that the plow engines were aggressively loud on purpose, accusing the airport of sabotaging their quest for inner peace. When politely reminded that clearing the runway is essential for flight operations, they sighed deeply and said, "Fine, but at least make them quieter. It's bad energy." 13. One traveler insisted their plane should take off despite the runway being encased in ice because they had watched a documentary where polar vehicles drove perfectly over frozen surfaces. They concluded airplanes should also have winter tires, preferably with chains like school buses on snow days. They ignored the part where planes need smooth surfaces and can't fishtail their way to altitude. They even suggested attaching spikes to the wheels, revealing a level of confidence in aviation mechanics unmatched by knowledge. The agent's face reportedly achieved a new expression, somewhere between awe and existential dread. 14. A passenger tried to complain that the sun wasn't doing its job, arguing that the lack of warmth in winter violated their expectations of basic solar service. They seemed genuinely offended that sunlight existed without heat, treating the star at the center of our galaxy like a defective household lamp. They asked whether the airport had alternative sun sources available, perhaps strong heating lights, to project onto the runway, which would apparently melt everything instantly and solve all problems. When told this was impossible, they muttered that someone clearly wasn't thinking creatively enough. 15. Someone demanded that the airline upgrade them for free because the cold air outside made them emotionally fragile. They felt their discomfort entitled them to first class. where they believed the air would be less wintry. They insisted the airline should counteract the cold with luxury compensation, as if atmospheric temperature were a negotiable inconvenience. When staff refused, the passenger accused them of weaponizing winter against paying customers. They even suggested installing climate-controlled tunnels from gate to plane, an idea that would require billions of dollars and the architectural imagination of a Bond villain. Their sense of entitlement, however, remained perfectly climate-controlled at all times. 16. A man once demanded the airline compensate him because his winter flight delay caused him to miss the perfect snowfall window at his ski resort, as though powder were a reserved seating arrangement and the mountain personally wronged him by snowing on its own schedule. He claimed the resort posts ideal snow times, which apparently means the universe is expected to run a synchronized calendar just for him. When staff reminded him that snow is not a subscription service with customizable settings, he insisted the airline should reimburse the lost magic. He even tried to argue the mountain should have held the snow for his arrival, revealing a touching belief that geology is customer-friendly. The agent, to their credit, resisted asking the obvious question: does this man also complain when the moon is late? 17. A traveler spent 30 minutes lecturing a gate agent because frost formed on the terminal windows, which they called visual intimidation tactics. They believed the airport intentionally kept the windows frosted to create urgency and make passengers feel grateful the plane was warm inside. According to them, frosted glass was emotional manipulation disguised as architecture, and airports use it to soften customers before bad news. When staff explained condensation, the traveler said, "Condensation is just rebranded anxiety," which was a bold interpretation of atmospheric science. They then demanded the windows be wiped clean manually, preferably with whatever cloth removes pessimism. The janitorial staff, wisely, remained uninvolved. 18. Someone attempted to report the snowflakes themselves as hostile objects after a gust of wind blew flurries into their face on the jet bridge. They approached security, insisting these snowflakes were aggressive and possibly engineered to sting. They asked whether the airport could check if the snow was natural or manufactured, implying a shadow industry of rogue snow production. When informed that snowflakes tend to behave identically in every winter environment, they accused the airport of covering for bad snow behavior. They even suggested the snow should be fined for making unwanted contact. It was the first known attempt to file a complaint against precipitation for assault. 19. A traveler became convinced the airline was hiding warm air somewhere and demanded access to it, as though the terminal kept a vault of premium temperatures reserved for VIPs. They insisted the staff were hogging the warmth, pointing suspiciously at a heater meant for employees working long shifts. When told the heater wasn't a luxury amenity but standard equipment to prevent frostbite, the traveler accused the airline of discriminatory heat distribution. Their solution? Move the heater to the center of the terminal so everyone could bask equally. The mental image of passengers huddled around a single industrial heater like Dickensian villagers was lost on no one but them. 20. A passenger asked whether the airline could temporarily disable winter along the flight path to ensure a smooth ride, casually pitching weather modification like a feature you find in the settings menu of a flight simulator. They said the airline has satellites, which in their mind implied direct control over atmospheric operations. When the agent mentioned the FAA, the passenger nodded knowingly, assuming this meant some secret federal weather panel manages the climate like a thermostat. The traveler argued winter was more of a suggestion anyway, proving once again that confidence requires no supporting evidence. 21. A traveler insisted the airline compensate them because the snow made their boots squeak on the airport floor, calling it public humiliation triggered by poor facility planning. They claimed the echoing squeaks drew attention to them specifically, even though dozens of other passengers sounded exactly the same. They suggested the airport install noise-dampening carpet pathways for shy people, complete with signage directing low-confidence walkers. As their monologue continued, the boots continued squeaking, punctuating each complaint with a sound effect no employee could escape. 22. One traveler spent a delay insisting that the cold air blowing through the terminal vents was deliberately aimed at them, treating HVAC systems like snipers, targeting their personal comfort. They demonstrated this by standing in various positions, narrating how the air followed them like a ghost with a grudge. When staff explained the vents are fixed in place, the traveler countered that emotional targeting doesn't require movement. They suggested the airport should install adjustable climate bubbles. Yes, bubbles, so passengers could travel wrapped in personalized weather. They didn't specify how this would work, but they spoke with the confidence of someone who's never met an engineer. 23. A passenger became outraged that de-icing fluid was the wrong color, insisting the greenish tint indicated a bargain brand that would cause the plane to freeze midair like a popsicle. They demanded the airline use name brand de-icer, which they could not identify but claimed they would recognize instantly. When an airport worker explained the color helps crews see coverage on the wings, the traveler dismissed this as corporate propaganda. Their final request? Please repaint the de-icing fluid to something trustworthy like blue. Chemistry will never recover from that suggestion. 24. A couple tried to file a complaint because the snow on the tarmac didn't look romantic enough for the photos they wanted to take while boarding. They expected gently falling flakes, warm golden light, and maybe a poetic drift across the runway. Instead, they got sideways snow whipping their faces like cold, wet sandpaper. They insisted the airline should have staged the aesthetic, as though aviation staff moonlight as wedding photographers. They even accused the weather of being uncooperative, which was the most accurate thing they said, though for all the wrong reasons. 25. Someone once demanded the airline provide winter-safe Wi-Fi, insisting cold temperatures interfere with internet performance and that the airline should reinforce the signal with thermal strengthening. The gate agent attempted to explain radio waves are not seasonal, but the traveler countered with, "Well, my Wi-Fi at home is worse in winter," which they delivered like irrefutable legal precedent. They suggested the airport wrap the routers in something warm, like little signal jackets, which raised new concerns about how this person treats electronics in general. 26. A man became offended that snow stuck to his coat when he walked outside, calling it unsolicited fabric interaction. He claimed the airline should have warned him that snow attaches without consent, which is certainly one way to describe gravity and moisture. He demanded a lint roller provided immediately and with apology, and when staff produced one, he escalated further, insisting the airline should cover emotional cleaning fees for the distress of brushing off winter. His coat survived the ordeal. The dignity of the complaint did not. 27. Someone was furious that their winter flight delay meant they had to spend more time near the airport's holiday decorations, which they claimed were visually aggressive and designed to antagonize people who don't like cheer. They insisted airports should detect customer moods and dim the joy accordingly, perhaps with adjustable decorations calibrated to emotional weather patterns. The idea of a responsive Christmas tree that lowers its own enthusiasm out of respect for one person's grumpiness was unintentionally the most festive thing about the entire conversation. 28. A passenger attempted to argue that their flight should be prioritized because their coat was too thin for this nonsense, as though boarding order is determined by fabric density. They insisted people with inferior winter gear should be allowed to board first for fairness, effectively proposing a triage system based on coat thickness. When this was denied, they held their arms tightly across their chest like an underdressed Dickens character and whispered, "This airline hates the cold-blooded." Several witnesses confirmed they were wearing a jacket that looked appropriate only for late spring optimism. 29. A traveler grew enraged that the snowstorm caused their flight cancellation because they had specifically checked the forecast 2 days earlier, and it said nothing about this, treating weather prediction like a sacred contract rather than a suggestion wrapped in uncertainty. They insisted the airline should honor the original forecast, as though meteorologists offer warranties. They even said the phrase "weather bait and switch," which was astonishingly creative and impressively incorrect. When the agent explained storms can form quickly, the traveler responded, "Then stop them from forming quickly," which was quite possibly the boldest misunderstanding of atmospheric science ever spoken indoors. If this is how people handle winter, I fear for spring. Drop your pick for the dumbest complaint below, because trust me, the bar is still underground.